Now back to the Brian Zimmerman Show. Here's Brian.
Hi, everyone. Brian here at your side for another episode of The Brian Zimmerman Show. Today, I want to share a personal story of getting laid off. And I know to some people out there, it's a touchy subject, depending on the circumstances of they're getting laid off. And I'm sure everybody, like I said, everybody during their professional career has gotten laid off or fired at least once in their lifetime. But this one for me is one that stands out the most. And I'm gonna pretty much start from the very beginning. About a week or so before I was laid off, I went to my boss and told him that I wanted to do a case study because we never had case studies or white papers or anything like that. And he told me that the VP, this lady who was the VP, that she would put something together for me. And long story short, it was something that I wanted to do. I think it was around food and beverage. And so she came back with a case study about Pepsi. And it was everything but a case study. She was obviously clueless as to what a case study entails, but I went with it. About a week later or so, my boss gets sick and he's out for a bit. And then he comes back, and every morning I'll pop into his office and say hello in the morning. And he said he was with somebody. He said, "We'll catch up later." So when I went back into his office, we sat down, and he had some new pictures on the wall. I think they were of bridges, covered bridges or something like that. Maybe they were bridges in different states. I can't exactly remember. And it was a cordial, friendly conversation, as we always have. And then he says, "Come on over to my desk. I want to talk to you." Didn't think anything of it. And basically, he told me that I was caught up in a company-wide layoff. And I kind of was getting numb, and the shock was setting in. Didn't really know what to say. And I says, "Well, why?" He says, basically that pharma pharma is constipated. Was his exact words, meaning that pharma companies are not buying from the company. Like it was kind of one of our big verticals that we were doing, which ironically was the reason why I was hired in the first place, because I was told that pharma was constipated. They weren't buying. So I was hired to work on another vertical. Anyway, I says, well, who's gonna do the sales work? Who's gonna do the front end? My job was the front end stuff. And his answer was production and operations, which really meant that the other salespeople that were there were going to keep their jobs. And so, obviously I went along with it. And I just kind of started to think about, well, you know what? Maybe I says, I'll work less hours. I'll take a pay cut. I'll work minimum wage. I was throwing everything at him, including the kitchen sink, to try to save my job, basically. And I made some sort of comment, I think, about is that would you consider that? And his response was, and I quote, "Unofficially yes, officially no." I didn't know even what that meant, but he says that I have about a week or so uh, until I was laid off, and I can work it. He said I can work it any way I want to. Okay, that gave me the impression that there was still a chance for me to save my job, that I may not be uh, laid off. And then I went to after the meeting was over, I immediately went to one of the guys that does some of the outreach, and I told him put up get a list together of all of my contacts. I was going to do an email automated email push, and nobody said leave now, right? So again, I was under the impression that I still had some time to save my job. So now I'm thinking, okay, well, now I'll show him that whatever. I remember him saying, um, he asked me once a few weeks prior about meetings or something, a certain meeting, and he says, "Well, I'm not going to wait for the burner to get hot or the kettle to get hot." And we did about 5 automated email pushes, and that's in that month before I was laid off. I think he was pretty much in panic mode. Um, but the following day, I called for a meeting with him because I wanted to show him some things that I thought could help us, maybe like a new approach, a different strategy, a different sales strategy. I had some different ideas that I wrote down, and I had some panel flip books that I had used in my previous positions, capabilities flip books that I thought we could implement. And I remember the CFO saying, "Oh no, this doesn't pertain to our business." And I'm like, "This does pertain to business, your business. This is a sales, just like any other sales strategy, tactic, whatever you want to call it, process that any company can use." Obviously, they already had their minds made up, and so my boss stands up and says, Friday's your official last day." So then it all pretty much sunk in. And then afterwards, I remember one or two of my coworkers. I emailed a few coworkers afterwards and told them, just kind of saying my goodbyes, really. And some of them were just kind of, they said, I'm shocked that you were let go so suddenly. And I said, yeah. I says, I think the smartest thing would have been, the whole theme around this was there was not enough cash flow and coming in to support the company, and there were people going to be laid off because of it. And my case was, or the way that I would have handled it was, or wished that it was handled, was my boss pulling me aside maybe a month or two prior and saying, listen, we're, limited cash flow is coming in, and we have to figure out what we're going to do. And, in another month or two, if things are not improving, we're going to have to let you go. Something to that effect. Or another smart thing would have been to do was to sit down with me and brainstorm and strategize about a new sales strategy, a new approach, a new path to take that we haven't done before, because they were all so married to doing webinars and email pushes and that sort of thing, and they had to have something new. They needed a new strategy, right? Looking on the outside now, on the other side of the fence, you can see that the sales process was a mess. It was virtually non-existent if you think about it. It needed to be improved upon, and I think that it could have been handled differently. And one of the things that my boss said to me that day, well, I was hoping during my laid off lecture, speech, whatever you want to call it, that my boss at least would have said to me, "You know what, it was nice working with you. I liked working with you. Let's keep in touch. No hard feelings. you did some great, excellent work. You brought in a lot of good prospects, a lot of good meetings, whatever, something positive. I heard nothing of that, and I was there a few years, and during that meeting, it felt like I was only there a few months. And I remember when we met the second time with my boss and the CFO. My boss said, "Well," he says, "I was trying to have him say something positive." He says, "Well, you fit well with the company." I think I said, "Why did you hire me?" I said, "You hired me. You must have saw some value." He said, "Well, you fit well with the company," which really didn't make any difference at that point. I remember going to one of the other sales people a few weeks prior, and she told me, and I quote, she told me, "I literally have nothing to do today." Now, I'm not sure why she admitted this to me, but she should have been the one that was laid off. And matter of fact, 3 months later, I found out that a couple of employees got promoted. I think a fear of them leaving a sinking ship. I think it was a scare tactic or something to have them stay um, with the company because the company was obviously um, not doing good. But I think that I wish that I could have been had it done differently. Um, in a sense. And I had a whiteboard, right? I always had a whiteboard on my wall of my pipeline and of meetings I've done and stuff that might close soon. And I remember there had to be at least a half a dozen, maybe 8 companies that I had in the pipeline. They were ready within the next month or so, ready to either become a meeting or something. And I remember a month later, I think after I was laid off, um, Tagasigo. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Takasago. They were on the board. I was working that company, and I found out soon after I got laid off that they closed, or they were working with them at some level. So I know that a lot of things. I wonder if people ran to my board and started working on stuff then, because there were some lot of warm leads on that board, and I didn't really have a voice. I remember at the end of I stopped. I wasn't invited to sales meetings anymore, and my boss admitted that. Yeah, you weren't. We know that that they shouldn't have done that or something to that effect. I think really at the end of the day, I think it was the VP lady who wanted me gone. I think because she had talked to me. I was in the office more than she was, mind you. She had called me or something once and asked me how things were going about a month or maybe 3 months before I was laid off. But that was the only time that she ever talked to me or asked me how things are going. How's the calls going? How's any meetings? Whatever? Do you need help with anything? Even the very few times I saw her in the office, uh, kind of on half of a hand, she would never come over or talk to me about anything. So um, I wanted to have a voice in a sense, right? I just think that I things could have been done differently, um, especially for me being there for so long. But um, it is what it is. But like I said, it's something that I wish that things would have been different. But at the end of the day, there's bigger and better things out there. So that is all. That is my story. And again, I would suggest anybody that's afraid of maybe getting laid off or fired or let go, my suggestion really is to once a month sit down with your boss or manager and just say, "Hey, how do you feel about my performance? Any concerns?" Um, and try to get that open conversation and feedback because then you can have that openness. And if there's something that does need to be worked on, well, now you know what needs to be worked on. just to be able to keep in check with your manager, and also for them to show that you are interested. Just when I went to him about the case study thing, it was something that we should have done a long time ago with case studies and white papers. It had to be done properly. It had to be done the right way. It was just what I got from that lady was just a blurb of it just, a case study is a problem that a company had, and how the company us fixed that problem, and then the result of of what the company then gained from us fixing their problem. That's a case study. But that'll do it for this episode. I'm Brian. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you next time.